Hi, my name is Rachel Weller, and I am an investor in startup companies, mostly in software and enterprise tech, but to some extent also in hard tech. I've been involved as an advisor in Ideas That Work Incubator. And what I've learned from working with startup entrepreneurs across any different industry is that most of them who are not already in finance or business would love to have more information about how to tell the story of their business that they want to get funded in a compelling way. The classic way to do that is the pitch deck. And if in some ways what I say is reductive or something you already know, I'm sorry. But I'm the kind of cook who follows a recipe and then I get to something that says put a pinch of something in. And I'm like, what is a pinch? Is a pinch a teaspoon? Is a pinch a tablespoon? So I'm going to give you my most back to basics idea about what a pitch deck should include. And hopefully that'll be helpful for you. And you can fast forward for something that you already know. Um, so there we go. And aside from having a great company or project, having a presentation is probably your best tool when you're going out to fundraise. It's something you can send in advance. It's something if you want to have it stand beside you or behind you while you're talking, or it can do the talking for you. But mostly it needs to tell a really good story. And you need to think about it like anything you communicate. You need to think about how your audience is going to receive it and not as much as what you want to say. If you're still thinking about what you want to say and not what your audience is receiving, it probably won't be as clear as you need it to be. So just the caveat that with any good communication, you need to put yourself in your audience's shoes, which in this case would be investors. And you also need to have other people besides yourself take a look at it and tell you if they're receiving it the way that you think they should be receiving it. Um, the next sort of concept I want to share with you is the actual recipe. And there is kind of a pretty standard format for these pitch decks. Um, you can rearrange how it's presented. This is how I usually see it presented to me, and it's how I usually like to have it presented to me. And I won't belabor you with reading all of these different slides, but these are the 12 basic slides you need to have. And when we have the title slide, um, it should be a screensaver. It really doesn't need to have any information. And like my next slide here, this is exactly what a title slide looks like. It might have your name and your company's name on it. And this is when you're introducing yourself and talking over Zoom, or if you're doing it in real life. And if it's something that you're sending out over email or text, then they can just quickly go through it. So don't overdo what you present. Do use white space or backspace. The next slide should be the summary slide. This is really your most important slide. You need to explain to your audience what it is that you're showing them. And you're probably going to be talking while they're looking at this. So they're getting your verbal and they're also getting some text. When that's happening, the text needs to be concise and clear, and it needs to be simple. So even if you think what you're doing is extremely complicated, you need to find a way to make it pretty simple in this summary slide. And if you can find a way to talk about what you do and the market size, and the financials and your team while you are talking over your summary slide, this is the time to do it. It should be very high level and it should be exciting. Remember, investors want to make money. So part of what you're telling them is how this is a no-brainer for them to take a risk on. You don't have to promise them it's going to make money. You have to promise them that it's worth the risk. And it's worth saying that, especially like I invest in software for the most part, but I sometimes invest in things and consumer items as well. Even for example, like a canning company I've invested in. And one of the things that you need to do is explain to them what the risk is and be honest. And then their investment is at risk. They know that. That's their job to know that. But hopefully, because they're investing at an early stage, the chance that they will make a greater multiple on their money than they would say by putting it in the bond market is why they're going to consider making a risky investment on you. But they also need to be excited by what you do. They need to be convinced that you're the one to do it. And they need to be convinced that there is a pathway to success. In addition to a pathway to success, they need to see that there's a way to exit their investment. But You can Google all that another day, but those are some things people are thinking when they're first getting to see what your business idea is. So your summary slide should be concise, but some of the things you should be talking about at a high level during your summary slide are the key aspects of your business. The next slide that I like to see is the problem that you are solving defined. Again, it should be almost as simple as this slide right here. One of the things that is my favorite kind of setup for investment is when I am talking to someone who possibly has no business experience and maybe no technical experience, but they have been doing something in some industry for 30 years and it's driving them crazy that there is some aspect that hasn't been solved and they know how to solve it. And they're going to make the capstone of their career solving that problem in their way. And that always gets me. And so if there's something obvious that needs to be fixed, it's usually going to be someone who's an expert or who constantly rubs up against that problem. That's going to be the person that fixes it well. So that's what excites you as an investor, is that there's a clear problem, no one's fixed it. This person is going to fix it for me. This company is going to fix it for me, or this group of people is going to fix it. So that's the next sort of exciting thing to do to set up and tee up your compelling business story. Then, of course, having explained what the problem is, you have to explain what your solution is. How do you solve the problem? And also, what is your product? This is where you have to convince someone it's not just an idea. And maybe you already have a product, but maybe you're just in that idea stage. So you have to convince them that your idea is essentially a product or will quickly be a product, and let them see it. What does it look like? And the hook here is this is where you sort of catch a venture capitalist interest. And maybe you're not going after venture capital. Maybe this is friends and family money, or maybe this is a strategic investor industry. But this is sort of where someone is going to actually get the light bulb and the I want to be involved with this kind of idea. And this, it doesn't have to be one slide. Your solution might take 2 or 3 slides, but it needs to be clear and easily understood, because that's why someone wants to be involved with it. They need to see that there's a path for success. And then, of course, once they are convinced that you have a problem and that it must be solved and that you're going to solve it with your product, then it's important what the market opportunity is. In venture capital world, we call it the TAM, the total addressable market. One of the things that one of the things that people who are pitching a company to me often say is the total addressable market for this is currently, $200 million. But this product is so exciting, it will actually increase the total addressable market because a whole new world of people who didn't know that they needed this product will know that they need this product. So the current TAM is X, but the TAM could be X times 5 because this product is going to actually democratize the industry, and now people that couldn't even conceive of accessing the product can do the product. This is also sort of where you have to consider the fact that the investor needs to make money in order to give you their money. And so they have to believe that there is a market out there for your product. And they need something to do with the size of that market. When I see really early stage companies, they're always telling me, well, we don't even know what the market is. And I don't want to encourage people to be hyperbolic or to not tell the truth or to invent data. Those aren't good things to do. But it is important to take every available data source you have to paint a picture of what the market might be and put a number by it. It is okay to say, this is what I think the market is based on these things. And then you show them your sources. In 2020, people bought this much. No one's captured this data again since 2020, but we know that, the industry has only grown since then. And since the industry has grown 50% since then, I have to take this number and say that it must be at this point. And that's just a conservative estimate, investor person. It's actually probably bigger than that. You can talk around what you don't know, and you can admit there's stuff that you don't know, but you need to give people a sense of what the actual numerical size of the market might be. Some people put this slide before they put the solution slide. And that there's no real rhyme or reason. You can do what you think makes sense. But I think it's important to give people a sense that there is a market and that it's really an exciting one. Then the next slide is the proof of concept. And this is sort of an augmentation of your solution slide. You need to show it works. If you already have a product, then you need, or a project, it might not be a thing, it might be an idea, but you need to have details here and some kind of evocation that it actually works. This is where you might give an investor a chance to actually ask questions. And that's a vibe thing. Maybe you're the kind of person who says, hey, I'm going to take questions at the end, or ask questions as I go. You can do it any way you want, but this tends to be where the questions start to come up. This is where you get the investor to understand what it is that you do. And it's sort of similar to what you would be showing your customer. So it's kind of like, this is where the investor puts themselves in the customer's shoes and thinks, would I buy this? And again, I have it as one slide. It might be 2 or 3 slides. Whatever it takes to show it, and never have, in the interest of just having one slide, gum up a slide. It's always better to have 2 or 3 slides than to have one slide with too much information on it. And then the obvious next step from your proof of concept is a slide that is the go-to-market slide. There are whole, textbooks written on go-to-market. What go-to-market, or sometimes you just hear people talking about GTM. And what it really means is how you find your customers. Okay, you've established that there's a problem. You've established that there's a solution, that you are the company to address the problem and that your solution is the right one, that there's a market for this product or project that you have. Now you need to convince your investor that there is a way to grab the customer. It's a little bit beyond the purposes of what we're doing here to talk about the cost of customer acquisition. But if it costs you $20 to acquire a customer who is going to spend $2, then it's not worth having a customer. And so you have to be able to convince the folks that you're in, that are considering an investment, that you will be able to go to market, and for a sum of money that doesn't make it cost prohibitive to go to market. And so it's sort of like talking about how you're going to reach customers. If you are a canned cocktail company, then it's how you're going to appeal to drinkers. If you are an enterprise software company, it's going to be how do you get past the data science people who need the product to the business layer inside the company that is going to approve the thing that the data scientists at that company need for their tech stack. In other words, any industry has varying degrees of complexity and varying ways that you would need to approach how you're going to go to market. But the idea that you're thinking about this is important for your investor. And they might have good ideas, particularly institutional investors or people who have been investing for a while. Often they've seen it all. And so there's no shame in asking for ideas here, but letting them know that you take this seriously and that you've got a plan is what you want to do here. And again, it doesn't have to be one slide. It could be several slides. But it should be pretty simple and easy to explain. And you're definitely going to be using your verbiage to explain what's on the text. So your story here that you say is as important as what's on your slide deck. The next slide is, and this is to varying degrees depending on how difficult or technical what you're doing is. This is where you talk about the technological or the scientific piece of what you're doing. And it may be very simple. It may be a tool and doesn't require a great deal of explanation. Or it may be that it's, some kind of complicated machinery or software-driven machinery that needs a little bit more explanation. The reason here is because this is when things get in terms of what the valuation of what you're doing is and how much, would I rather put $100,000 into a company that's valuation is, 10 million, or would I rather put $100,000 into a company at the same stage whose valuation is 100 million? There are reasons for doing both, but I need to know what kind of technology I'm investing in, because the margins are a lot higher in tech companies than they are usually in consumer companies. In other words, what it costs you to make and sell a tube of wrapping paper for a present is considerably different than what the margins would be on software. And so that's something that people need to think about when they think about how much they want to be involved in. The other thing is this patentable? Is it defensible? You may be at a stage where you already have a patent, or that you have this incredible sort of defensive moat that's going to make it impossible for anyone else to do. But you also might not be at that stage. And so you should be prepared for questions on that. And maybe even to have considered like the intellectual property aspects in advance of talking to the prospective investors, depending on what you're doing. And there's different answers to that question, but to have thought about it would probably be important at the stage where you're asking for money, even friends and family money. The next thing that, and this is where a lot of early stage investors do not come in with much of an approach or a plan for me or an idea, and that is, who's your competition? And the thing I always hear is, I have no competition. No one's ever thought of this before. That's almost impossible to be true. And so you have to explain where you fit in the landscape. Maybe you don't have a direct competition, but you probably have some kind of competition, even if it's the status quo that you're trying to solve for. So this is where you need to get broad if you need to, or specific if it's specific, but you need to have really looked at what the competition is to your product or idea, and then explain how you're better or where you fit in or why you're going to be appealing. And I have actually, in my next slide, I show you an example of a competition slide. And this was for a tech company, but I think it's a good example. And it's the CEO has talked about this. Is the CEO would have said, this is how I view the market. And it was the CEO of a company called Datatron. And in the lower right of the slide, there's a sort of blown up rectangle that has the word Datatron in there. And it's where that CEO was trying to explain, we fit into, it doesn't matter if you know what these terms are or not, we fit into the model production side of things in the machine learning AI space, not the model development side. And just seeing this kind of maze of logos and a graphic that explains where you are, it probably doesn't mean anything to anyone who doesn't sort of live and breathe this space, but it actually is reassuring to someone who does live and breathe this space that you understand the space, that you know who the other players are, and you know what you do vis-a-vis those other players. The next slide I've got for you is an even more drilled down version of that. And those are just so that you have some examples of what it might look like. This is a very crowded space, and this is also about 5 years old. And it was when the sort of AI machine learning solutions, there were a bazillion, there still are a bazillion. But these were sort of widgets that were starting to fit into and coalesce into larger companies. Like, you probably heard of Databricks, which is in the top right there, but you probably haven't heard of some of these other smaller companies. And they were all sort of in the process of fighting for relevance in different niches of the AI space and getting acquired by or merging with or simply not succeeding. But just having a sense of where you fit into the world and showing your potential investor that you know where that is, that's very reassuring to them, as opposed to being told that there's no competition, which never feels true. The next slide that I usually suggest that you introduce at this section is the team slide. This is, of course, where you talk about you. And I think pictures are sort of standard. We shouldn't be judging a book by its cover, but let's not give potential investors an excuse to do so. So it actually matters if the pictures like are pretty consistent or whether the people look wildly different in the pictures. And it's something usually solvable by just telling your co-founder or whoever else you want to feature on the team slide that you'd like everybody to send you a picture of them looking like straight on, or, profile to the right, and with, a dark background or a natural background. And you can change the background if you need to. But if you can get some consistency in there, that's somehow reassuring. And it's also where if it's very early stage and it's just you and a co-founder, that's fine. But if you also want to feature that maybe you've got someone advising you on financials, or maybe you have a tax accountant who's, stepped up and doing other things for you and managing your cap table, or, you can actually put people who aren't on the payroll as advisors in your slide if they're really truly involved with your company and if you think it will help you put your best foot forward. And people like to be advisors, so don't be afraid to ask. I think this slide goes to the end because most of the time you're in fact pitching it. They're seeing you already. But it's also something they're going to get to one way or the other. So I hate for the team slide to steal that sort of punchline space that comes at the very beginning of the pitch deck. And I think also you want to make sure if you do have prior startup experience amongst you and your co-founders, this is where you let them know that. That's reassuring for potential investors as well. The financials may be pretty much notional at this point in your company's story, but even if they are, and then especially if they're not, you need to be able to talk about money. You need to be able to talk about bookings and revenue and margin and EBITDA and cash flow. And you don't necessarily have to have numbers at this stage, but you have to be familiar with those concepts. And if you can see a sort of path to some growth in revenue, if you have a product or a project now and you're making $3 and you're not even trying to sell it, it's all just word of mouth. And then you could say next year, if we do these two things, we should be able to increase our customers by such and such amount, and then we'll be making 3 times 3, like, well, $9. And then if you, potential investor, are able to invest capital in us, we will use it to do X, Y, and Z, and we will refine our product in the following way. And then we could see, we have a line of sight on a revenue of, 3 times 3 times 3 in year 4. And this is a way of trying to talk about what your goals are for revenue and what you can project your revenue to be if things go the way that you'd like them to go in terms of getting investment and the environment moving the way you want it to. A lot of people aren't comfortable about talking about the financials at this point, but if someone's going to invest in you, they need to at least see that you have some revenue goals and that you see a way to make money, not just like, this is a great idea, it's going to make money. I'll give you an example of a great idea that seems like it should be for certain invested in, and yet there isn't a clear way to make money, and it's also tragic. And it might change over time, but I used to work at the National Institutes of Health, and there were any number of imaging technologies that were already years ago using machine learning and AI. And let's say they could detect a certain kind of cancer 40% like more accurately and more frequently than the human being that was looking at these slides. But because the people who were creating that technology didn't know how to incorporate that into the electronic medical record, or how to get CMS to let you hit a button so that you could generate revenue when you ran that algorithm, it wasn't a company. It was just research product. And so this is why you need to be able to explain the financials and the revenue and be able to talk about it, because people have to be able to see that you actually have goals for the finances. And the truth is, when you have goals for your finances, it actually is more achievable than if you just say, my great idea will certainly have traction. So just so that you need to be able to talk about these things at whatever stage that you're at. And then that's really it. The way I suggest that you wrap it up, the final slide that I do is a summary slide. It's the same exact slide as a summary slide that we showed at the beginning, because you're reminding them of what it is that you're doing. And it allows you to wrap up and let them soak that in again. Kind of like the way if you read a book that has a great first paragraph, once you finish the book, you might go back and look at the first paragraph again. Like it has new meaning once you've soaked up all of the story. And so hopefully with this recipe, you have some sense of what it takes to tell a compelling story. And I hope it gets you excited to tell your story. Good luck.